On Halloween night 2002, 21-year-old Chris Jenkins, a University of Minnesota student, went to celebrate the spookiest night of the year down at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill with his girlfriend, Ashley Rice, and 3 other friends. Shortly after midnight, Chris was separated from his friends and ejected from the bar. According to reports later given to police, a drink was accidentally spilled on his pants, and the security supervisor assumed that Chris was so intoxicated that he urinated himself. After Chris was removed, the security guard in question was given instructions not to let him back inside. Unfortunately for Chris, since his Native American Halloween costume had no pockets, he had asked Ashley to keep his wallet, keys, and cell phone in her purse for him, and his coat was left inside the bar on what turned out to be a chilly 20-degree night. Since he was not the designated driver, Chris was unable to get a ride home and could not contact his friends inside the bar. He was last seen headed away from the bar on foot, but did not return to his residence and was eventually reported missing. On February 27th the following year, Chris Jenkins' bloated, decaying corpse was found floating beneath a bridge on the Mississippi River. He was still dressed in his Halloween costume and had gotten wedged in the branches of a large tree located next to the upper St. Anthony Falls Dam. The medical examiner found no signs of foul play on Chris's body, so the official cause of death was listed as drowning. Despite the police ruling it a death by misadventure, his family launched their own independent investigation and discovered a number of odd discrepancies. The Jenkins family hired a private detective, Chuck Loesch, to further investigate their son's disappearance. When Loesch questioned staff at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill, they maintained that Chris left the bar on his own, and the venue's owner eventually issued a gag order instructing employees not to speak to anyone without an attorney. Loesch also contacted the Federal Reserve Bank, who happened to be the owners of the 2 CCTV cameras that had a good view of the Hennepin Avenue Bridge. The bridge was on the route that Jenkins was likeliest to have taken, but when the bank checked the surveillance footage from the earlier morning hours of November 1st, there was no sign of him. Loesch's investigation also led him to multiple witnesses who each independently recalled a fight that had occurred in front of a local pizza place. And though it was unclear if the victim was Chris, a gang of around 9 or 10 people had violently attacked another outside of the restaurant. Mike Casey, an off-duty police officer, was present in the area on the night of Jenkins' disappearance. He was moonlighting as a security guard for the nearby Hennepin Center for the Arts and was introduced to Jenkins by his girlfriend, Ashley Rice. Ashley happened to work at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill and was familiar with Casey, well enough that she had borrowed pieces of his uniform to complete her cliched sexy cop costume. There are rumors that Casey had in fact masterminded Jenkins' removal from the bar as a way to get to Ashley, given that he actually gave her a ride home later that night when her shift finished. The Minneapolis Police Department never formally questioned Casey, but stated that he's a married man with children. We don't want to break up a family. An incriminating statement indeed. The Jenkins family went as far as hiring 2 separate groups of bloodhound trackers to trace Chris's scent from the Lone Tree Bar across the street to an underground parking garage. The scent trail led to parking stalls that one of the bar's bouncers was reportedly parked in on Halloween night. A bloodhound produced a mild hit for Chris's scent on this person's vehicle. Droplets of blood residue, a piece of red string, and red feather fragments which possibly belonged to the headband of Jenkins' costume were also found in the garage. Jenkins' blood alcohol was only 0.12%, so he could not have been particularly drunk, but coroners noted that traces of GHB were found in Chris's system. However, since GHB is a substance which is produced by the body naturally, this did not necessarily mean Chris was drugged. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden took issue with Jenkins' body being found with his arms crossed in front of him. Drowning victims who accidentally fall into water are almost always found face down with their arms outwards towards their sides and their clothing disheveled. Yet Jenkins' shirt was tucked into his drawstring pants and his oversized slip-on moccasins were still on his feet. This led to speculation that Chris was already dead when he was placed in the river. Hydrologists who studied the Mississippi River were highly skeptical that Chris's body could have been in the water for as long as 4 months without ever being seen, as the river did not freeze over until January 2003. What's more, the area beneath the 3rd Avenue Bridge was searched in the weeks following his disappearance, with no sign of him. A daytime thawing occurred on February 27th, the day Chris was found, so he possibly floated from another location before his body got wedged in the trees. Jenkins' family found it extremely unusual that there was no bruising on his body. Their son was an enthusiastic lacrosse player, a goalie in fact, who often came home from practice with huge purple and yellow patches on his legs and forearms. Since these bruises were not present, his parents believed he may have been alive for a couple of days after he went missing, allowing enough time for his bruises to heal. 3 years later, in 2006, the Jenkins family met with Minneapolis Police Chief Tim Dolan, who had decided to reopen the investigation based on the newly attained evidence. Chris's death was eventually reclassified as a homicide, and Chief Dolan held a press conference to issue a formal apology to the Jenkins family. Years later, Dolan would state that he estimated Jenkins' death was 50% chance of homicide, 30% chance of accidental death, and 20% chance of ending his own life. Once the case of Jenkins' death was reopened, an informant told authorities he had witnessed somebody throw Chris's body off the Hennepin Avenue Bridge into the Mississippi River. But there was skepticism about this story since Chris had no broken bones or injuries, and it would not have been possible to toss him over the bridge's high safety railing without his body hitting a steel support beam and vertical metal cables on the way down. In July 2007, the Hennepin County District Attorney's Office announced that they had been approached about filing charges against a suspect for Chris's murder, but declined to do so. The suspect in question was one Jeremy Alford, who was serving a life sentence for the brutal murder of a man by the name of Douglas Miller. Alford admitted to being a regular drinker down at the Lone Tree Bar and Grill around the time of 2002. Chris's case also had been connected to the infamous Smiley Face Killer, as his death took place around the same time that many college-aged men in the Midwest were discovered dead in bodies of water after a night of drinking. But unlike many of the other cited cases, no smiley face graffiti has ever been discovered in relation to Chris's death.
This happened about a month ago. I'm doing much better now, and for my future jobs, I will never take night shifts, as the dark alone gives me the creeps. I've applied for many jobs because I'm the legal age for working, as I'm in high school. I'm in desperate need of money, and I need to help my family out as well, so at this point, I would take any job I can get. 5 jobs accepted me, so I decided to do a trial at my first job that was pretty quick enough to accept, which happened to be McDonald's. I need to say that the staff and the manager were all very nice, and my friend also works there, which was a total bonus. The only really downfall working there was probably the customers, which my friend agreed. But anyway, I didn't really know what to pick for the shifts, or even if I wanted the job, so I asked for a practice shift. My manager happily agreed and let me choose my times. Instead of daytime shift, I chose the night, which was a very bad decision. But hey, I needed to see what it was like working there anyway, so this will be easy since it's night, right? Well, I was terribly wrong. I got ready in my friend's uniform that she let me borrow, and she even drove me there. I'll be honest, the McDonald's was rather sketchy. When I say sketchy, I mean there's so many alcoholics and druggies around, and upon arrival it just didn't feel right. During the car ride, I had a gut feeling that it wasn't going to be a good shift, but my friend kept reassuring me that all will be fine. She dropped me off at the bus stop, which was 5 minutes from my workplace, and said that she would pick me up at 12 a.m. It was around 10 p.m., so my practice shift lasts for about 2 hours. I agreed and said for her to pick me up at the same spot that she dropped me off at. As she sped off, I merely watched as her car shrunk into the distance. After I saw it was gone, I started walking towards McDonald's, but while walking, I began to hear footsteps behind me. I didn't really think much of it because it was a normal thing. The person was probably just walking to their car or McDonald's or even the shops, but I had a really bad feeling. I felt like I was almost being watched, and I stopped for a second. The footsteps stopped with mine, and I looked behind to see a guy around his mid-40s just eyeing me off. I got really weirded out as he just smiled at me and then breathed very heavily. He was taller than me and he looked rather stronger and bigger than me as well. He was around what looked to be a few meters away. I quickly looked away and ran off to my workplace. There was only about 3 people working, my manager and my male friend. It was about 10:30 p.m. and I had already had a share of drunk and rude people filling the orders up or even tried hitting on me. But he quickly left and shortly afterwards my friend showed up and helped me. He helped me out with most things and I felt rather safe with him. He was actually an acquaintance of mine, but we soon grew to be best friends. After I was done taking some drunk guy's order, my friend pulled me aside and asked if I knew the guy outside. I was kind of confused at what he meant, and at first I thought he was just joking around. That is, until he pointed at the right window. My mouth went dry, and my face completely dropped. It was the same creepy guy that was following me before work. But I didn't tell him that. Instead, because I was an idiot, I kinda just laughed a bit and said that it was no big deal. He shrugged it off and we went back into the kitchen. It hit 11 p.m. No more customers were present and the same guy would not stop staring at me. At that point, I kind of just held my head down and just begged, hoping that he wouldn't come in. I could just feel his beady eyes run up and down my body. It was gross. It made me feel dirty. He's been there ever since the start of my shift and has been there for about 30 minutes, making it 10:30 now. I started to panic a bit as I was absolutely begging for him to not come in. In the middle of my thoughts, I heard something. My heart absolutely stopped as I then heard the sound of the door being opened. The creepy guy slowly walked towards my counter, eyeing my whole body until he was right in front of me, heavily breathing and almost drooling. His breath reeked like alcohol and cigarettes. He had a musky scent that, to be honest, nearly made me vomit. Red flags were totally going off, but I just tried to continue with my nice act. He wouldn't stop staring at me. I glanced at my friend who was in the kitchen. He was pretty busy, basically making sure nothing was getting burned. I turned my attention back to the guy and, no matter what I asked him, he was silent. It probably went on like that for about 5 minutes straight. That is, until he finally said something.
Such beautiful skin. So young. Short black hair. Such a nice complexion you have.
Before I could even speak or try and call someone over, something I wasn't prepared for then happened. The old guy launched towards me and tried entering the counter part, which happened to be the same part I was working at. He then looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Trying to climb over the counter wasn't easy for him though, eventually trying to grab me and getting stuck midway as I tried backing up. To my luck, I then slipped and totally landed on my butt. I tried my best crawling away, hoping that he wouldn't pass through. I was of course rather startled and afraid to the point that I couldn't even utter a single word. My friend dropped what he was doing as he screamed for my manager to then come over. My manager quickly showed up, which then made the old guy get back up and then flee. My friend quickly ran to my aid and he took me to the back room, which is what my manager told him to do in order to calm me down. Shortly after, we called the cops. I glanced at my friend as he looked pretty pale and rather puzzled, like he saw a ghost. My manager waited at the counter for the cops. That's when my friend quickly explained who the guy was. As it turns out, the guy was known for creeping on the female staff members while they worked. He would take pictures, ask for their number, offer alcohol, and even documented what they looked like. He was actually already banned from even entering the place or even being near it. The cops were already very aware of who he was due to his creepy behavior in the past. After the whole investigation and getting questioned, it was about 1 a.m. and I was let go. My friend was with my other friend while I got questioned, and on my way home, my friend held my hand and kept reassuring me that everything will be fine. Safe to say, I don't think I'll ever go back there again, and after this, I don't think I trust any night shifts. I think I'm gonna work at a different fast food place as well. So to that creepy old guy who's hopefully in jail, please stay away from me.
I thought it would be kind of fun to share a spooky event that happened to me a few years ago around Halloween. I had just moved to my current flat in Rains Park, southwest London, and I was fairly unfamiliar with the area. Now my current bosses and supervisors know that I'm fighting a losing battle when it comes to the reliability of the Southwest trains, and as a result have less than reliable timekeeping when it comes to arriving to work on time. A battle that I had hoped to circumvent with the purchase of a bicycle. Sadly, though, the London weather and my inherent idleness jointly conspired to once again force me to take the trains to and from work. While some people are more than aware that the trains keep me from arriving to work on time, not many of you are aware of the troubles I have returning home. That is to say, I have many a time found myself stuck at Clapham Junction with no train to take me back to Rains Park. In these circumstances, I have to take a bus to Wimbledon Common and walk the remaining 3 miles on foot. It is actually quite a pleasant walk. London doesn't have many hills if I walk along the Ridgeway. You can actually occasionally catch a nice view. True, it is of Croydon, but a nice view nonetheless. Now, to call Wimbledon Village a privileged area would be an understatement. The driveways are home to sports cars and luxury utility vehicles, so you can imagine I have very uneventful walks home. I rarely see anyone on the trip about, from the odd older couple, perhaps walking home from a late dinner party, or even a person walking their dog. The neighborhood is quiet and gets to bed early, and that night was just like the others, initially. I had gotten off the bus at the War Memorial, walked through the village center, and turned onto the Ridgeway. My phone battery had died somewhere between Wandsworth and Southfields, so I had to do the walk without music, and this always made the walk seem longer. My usual practice was to walk along and look at the houses and try to guess what the people that lived in the houses would be like. Fast car, business types, SUV and toy still in the front yard, larger family, that kind of thing. I was playing my game and decided to have a cigarette, so I stopped. I was searching for my lighter and looking around when I noticed that I was not the only one on the street. Now this was unusual but hardly alarming. What was strange, however, was that the person wasn't the sort I had grown used to seeing. It was a young lady. She appeared to be drunk, or tired perhaps. I lit my cigarette and paused for a second, just a quick second to judge to see if she would be capable of making it home by herself, or perhaps maybe she would need me to call someone for her. It was at this point that I realized that she was crying. I started to walk over to her to make sure she was alright. She stopped walking and immediately froze. I noticed that she was in some sort of Halloween costume, a schoolgirl in fact. And as I got closer, I began to realize that she was in fact around the age of 15 or 16. She was deathly white. Her makeup must have been professionally done, or she had spent an incredibly long time preparing it. I began to think that maybe her friends had made fun of her costume, and she had run off from whatever party she had been at, drunk and upset. I started to feel a bit unnerved when I noticed that she was staring directly at me as I approached. I can assure you that in a city the size of London, we have an unspoken rule of avoiding eye contact with strangers at all costs. It was at this point I assumed that she was under the influence of something other than alcohol, and I decided to be a bit more cautious. I stopped about 4 or 5 feet away from her and spoke. "Are you okay? You seem to be a little upset. Are you in any sort of trouble?" Nothing from her part aside from that stare. "Have you had a little too much to drink? Maybe some smoke?" "Yeah, right. I know hallucinogens when I see them." There was still no response. Do you need a taxi home? Do you remember where you live? At this, the girl began to cry, but this time, she was absolutely wailing. I could feel her raw sense of despair. I actually flinched at the sound. It was positively unbearable. She was dancing on the border of hysterics, perhaps even putting one foot along the line to see what would happen. I was stunned. I wanted to console her and run in equal measures. I wanted to comfort her and chastise at the same time. All I managed was a meek, "Why are you crying?" She must have heard me somehow, because she began to draw herself back from the edge of what can only be described as a complete breakdown. She was still heavily sobbing, but once again, she brought her eyes up to mine and said, very softly, "Because you're gonna die." Now, I've been unfortunate enough to witness death firsthand on more than one occasion. Suffice it to say that these events have always left me with a lot to think about, and I in fact have come to terms with my own mortality quite early in life. It struck me that perhaps, like too many of us had, this young lady had someone quite close to her die recently. Perhaps she was going through the same dark realizations that follow being in the company of death. The same thoughts that can keep children up at nights and the pews full at churches. I wanted to let her know that everything would be fine, and that death was simply a part of life. All I managed, however, was a slightly incredulous, "I know." At this she seemed slightly taken aback, almost angry. She responded, "You are going to die, and he is going to kill you." Alarms went off in my head. I began to feel a bit more threatened. I decided right then and there that talking this girl down from whatever bad high she was on was no longer my responsibility. Had not the venerable Hunter S. Thompson himself warned us of the dangers of underestimating the ability of a drug to take control of a person? Good luck, I said, and with that, turned and began to walk away. After about 5 steps, I quickly looked back to see her still standing there. She put her head down and began to audibly sob again. I quickened my pace and shortly had walked along the natural bend in the road, leaving her out of sight. I left a bit agitated. I remember putting my headphones back in my ears and trying to listen to music from my phone, only to be reminded that it was still out of power. I was still 2 miles away from home, but at the pace I was walking, I was confident I could cover the ground in less than 20 minutes. No less than 2 minutes later, as when I first heard the shouting. It was a man's voice, layered within an excruciating sense of malice and rage.
"I am coming for you."
I couldn't quite place where the voice had come from, but it seemed as though he was at some distance behind me, on the same road, possibly from where the girl had been. I immediately realized that I was to be the victim of some sort of Halloween prank. I didn't, however, slow down. I imagined at this point that I was supposed to get scared and begin to run, and I was determined not to play along. The man yelled again, and this time he seemed to be significantly closer.
"I hate you."
Now the voice had seemed to come from somewhere close by behind me. That is to say, at the volume of the voice, I would have expected to have seen the man addressing me, but I was still very much alone on the street. I was walking quite fast, so the person yelling at me must have been running, yet I heard no other footsteps. There was obviously more than one prankster, and they had various hiding spots along the street. I quickly decided to be a rather poor sport and cut off the main road and go down Thornton Road by the Swan Pub. I hate to admit that their practical joke had gotten the better of me, and I did not want to see what they had in store for me next. I made it to the front of the second house on the street when I heard that terrible voice shout at me again.
"You are going to die."
This time the voice seemed to have come from the entrance of the street, less than 80 feet away, perhaps a last chance at scaring me before I disappeared into the darker side of the street. Since these streets were darker, I decided that I would lose no pride in starting to jog down the hill. I knew it was all probably fun and games, but the ferocity of the shouting left me worried that I could in fact be dealing with a real maniac. True, it would have been interesting to be a part of the most elaborate mugging I had ever heard of, but that voice just left me with the impression of true hatred. I didn't want to meet the person, or people rather, that could mimic and channel such malignant feelings at will. I had made it to the curve where Thornton Road becomes Thornton Road, when all of a sudden,
"I will kill you."
This time the voice seemed to be directly to the right of me. He must have been hidden behind the fence of some house, or perhaps even within the house itself. I had obviously walked right into their trap. I broke into a sprint at this point. Pride be damned. I began to run quite fast, and then faster, straight downhill. At this point, I actually was starting to panic. My mind was playing terrible tricks on me, and it seemed as though the voices were all around me, constantly yelling at me, constantly screaming. Up ahead was the main road, Whirlpool Road to be precise. Well lit, busy, and I could hail a cab and be home in minutes. But the voices, the immensity.
"I hate you, you coward. Die, die, die."
Every second, all around me, the adrenaline must have been heightening my every sense. I admit, I was scared, and it seemed as though for some reason, that terrible voice was booming off every surface on the street. It felt as though I was simultaneously running away and into a mad rage. The words felt like gusts of terrible hot wind, pushing its venomous anger at me. I couldn't take it anymore. The voice seemed to make me share that same intense anger, and I thought to myself, am I the one shouting? And I felt like a victim. I wanted to fucking kill the people who were playing this fucked up trick on me. I felt the hatred.
"Time to die, coward. I hate you."
I decided to give up. In one quick moment, I decided I would stop running as fast as I could and have a cigarette and wait for these people to show themselves. I quickly stopped running and spun around. A car beeped as it raced past exactly where I would have run to had I not stopped at that exact moment. In my blind panic, I had run past the sidewalk of the main road and onto the actual road and had avoided being run down by inches. I looked up the road I had come from. Darkness. Silence. Whoever had been up there was gone now. I lit my cigarette and took a few moments to calm down. Smoking had saved my life that night. I went home after that, and nothing more happened to me. But as I was standing there trying to calm down, working through the panic and adrenaline, I seemed to remember hearing a soft whisper. Perhaps it's just my imagination, but I thought I heard a girl's voice, softly saying, "Not such a coward after all."
At 5:15 a.m. on the morning of July 6, 1997, a Starbucks employee arrived at work to open up the Wisconsin Avenue Northwest branch of the world-famous coffee company, situated just north of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. There was a lot of work to be done before the morning rush, and the employee in question had yet to imbibe their morning espresso to really kick them into gear. So, by their own admission, they were pretty groggy by the time they headed out back to one of the freezer units, intending to fetch some of the breakfast pastries that would go on sale that morning. But when the overtired staff member cracked open the freezer unit, they saw something that made their heart race. Inside was the frozen, lifeless corpse of 25-year-old night manager Mary Catherine Mahoney, along with the bodies of 18-year-olds Emery Allen Evans and Aaron David Goodrich. Although they weren't always on the same shift pattern, the employees knew his slain coworkers well, and the horror of witnessing their frozen, discolored cadavers was almost too much to bear. They raced out of the Starbucks and flagged down a bus driver who was only just beginning his morning route, and given how they could have just called 911 from the on-site telephone, running to find the comfort of another living person is very telling of this person's distraught state of mind. Within 5 minutes of the initial 911 call, police were on scene and taking stock of the situation. All 3 employees had obviously been herded into the rear freezer units before being shot, execution style. But what initially confused the investigation was that not a single cent was missing from the Starbucks. If the motivation wasn't robbery, then it looked a lot like a brutally well-executed targeted killing. But why on earth would someone ambush and murder 3 coffee shop employees during their routine night shift? What made the murders all the more shocking was that Georgetown has been traditionally a low-crime area of Washington, D.C., with local district council member Jack Evans saying to have a triple homicide anywhere in the District of Columbia is an unusual event, but to have a triple homicide in Georgetown is extraordinary, and this has never been a place where crime has been a problem. Over the course of that balmy July morning, scores of blue-uniformed officials made their way to the scene to look for evidence outside the split-level brown brick store. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians alike pored over the scene for hours on end after the bodies were found, working inside and outside the building adorned with the familiar green and black logo. They dusted doors for fingerprints, searched the store, and took statements from local residents in the hopes of piecing together what had happened. But it was only when Mary Mahoney's car was examined that further evidence was found, evidence which indicated that the murders were no random attack. Inside, the car was spotless, save for what looked like signs that Mahoney had recently spent time playing with a pet: a dirty tennis ball, a plastic chew toy, a dog's brush, and a red towel. The only possible indication that something had gone awry was a flat tire on the front passenger's side of the car, evidence that her attacker had made provisions to prevent her from fleeing. Mary was special, her mother later said. She had an enormous heart. She probably would have compassion for the person who killed her. When she moved to Washington several years prior, Mary would jog alone an hour before daybreak, never worrying about being attacked or assaulted. She adored animals, particularly horses, and even took in Marlou, her sister Molly's toothless black and white alley cat. She attended various New York colleges before graduating with honors from Towson State University near Baltimore, and was a loyal and active Democrat, interning for Bill Clinton when he was first elected. Yet according to her mother, it was her managerial job at Starbucks that really excited Mary. She had been employed by the company for 2 years and enjoyed being the manager. She was often seen sweeping the sidewalk in front of the store, and obviously took pride in her store. What she didn't enjoy, though, was disciplining employees, particularly one that Mary had recently dismissed for allegedly stealing several $100s. She struggled with the issue before having to fire him, her mother said, and for a long time, this became homicide detectives' main theory regarding the Starbucks shootings. Yet despite their hard work and determination, they came up short at every turn, eventually turning to the televisual law enforcement institution that is America's Most Wanted. After picking the case up, America's Most Wanted staged a thorough recreation of the murders and detailed many of the theories that police were toying with. They also advertised the number of an anonymous hotline, pleading with those with any information to come forward. And it seems this appeal struck a nerve with one member of the public, who called in with not only a frightening piece of information, but also a rather courageous proposal. In the hours following the broadcast of the Starbucks shootings, a woman called into America's Most Wanted hotline to inform them that she was dating a man who actually knew the shooter firsthand. This mystery person had confessed, even boasted, of committing the murders, and on more than one occasion. The couple had initially taken the man's word as pure bluster, but after seeing the Starbucks shooting edition of America's Most Wanted, it became apparent that he might just be telling the truth. The woman then left her name and numbers so she could be contacted by DC police, and when they did so, she actually agreed to wear a wire for them, in the hopes that she could catch a confession on tape. It was then that they learned their suspect's name: Carl D. Cooper. Cooper lived in Prince George's County near Baltimore City and just on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. itself. He was the son of a church deacon who lived with his wife and son, but at the time, he lived anything but the wholesome life of a family guy. At the time of the Starbucks shooting, Cooper was being charged with attempted murder in a 1996 shooting of an off-duty police officer in Prince George County. As for his family's complicity in his crimes, it turned out that it was Cooper's wife that purchased the 9mm handgun that her husband used to shoot the officer. It was the combination of this and his alleged involvement in the Starbucks shooting that led DC police to wiretap Cooper's home phone. He was arrested after making reference to several local shootings, but insisted that a friend of his named Keith Covington had joined him in the Starbucks robbery, and it was him that executed the 3 victims. However, when they caught up with Covington, they discovered he had been recovering from a gunshot wound at the time of the murder, meaning it was highly unlikely that he was even present on the scene, let alone the one to have done the shooting. "If I killed them, I'd say I killed them," he reportedly said. "But that's not me. I'm not saying I'm a saint, but I'm not going to go out and just kill people. You gotta be a dummy or a psycho to do something like that. It's pure evil." When confronted with the evidence of his lies, Cooper admitted to lying about his so-called friend's involvement because he killed 3 people and was afraid to go to jail. In the process of trying to avoid the death penalty, Cooper told the investigators he'd been staking out the Starbucks for about a month, confirming that he acted alone and fired 2 guns, a .38 caliber snub-nosed revolver and a .38 caliber pistol. Cooperating heavily due to the ever-looming threat of the death penalty, Cooper confessed to shooting the manager, Mary Mahoney, when she refused to give him keys to the safe, which held over $10,000 in cash. When she said no, Cooper shot a warning shot into the ceiling, which sent a terrified Mahoney running into the employee hall. Cooper pursued, caught her, and wrestled with Mahoney over her keys. But when her resistance looked like it would be too much to overcome, he shot her dead. He then shot the 2 other Starbucks workers at the store, executing one as they survived the attack and attempted to crawl to safety. Cooper later stated that he wanted to put him out of his pain and misery, but it's more than likely this thinly veiled attempt at showing he had a conscience was nothing but an attempt to dodge the first death penalty charge in over 30 years. During his trial, even when the relatives of the victims wept openly in court, Cooper remained chillingly composed. He also admitted to murdering a 39-year-old security guard named Sandy Griffin during a botched robbery. Cooper had helped Griffin at gunpoint before demanding that the security guard hand over their expensive .40 caliber handgun. But then, fearing Griffin would assault him in the process to defend herself, the serial murderer executed the security guard before quickly fleeing the scene. Cooper admitted to then selling the pistol on the street for $300. Once Cooper was convicted of the Starbucks murders and sentenced to life in prison, Griffin's relatives were no doubt pleased that their loved one's killer had been put away, but they expressed frustration that it had taken 3 more murders, maybe even more, before the killer had been caught. To them, a lack of urgency in the DC police force had cost 3 young people their lives and raised many questions regarding their competence and command. If the account of his defense attorney is to be believed, Cooper is nothing more than a career criminal whose shaky temperament and unbridled greed caused him to take the lives of the innocent. But time and time again, Cooper had the opportunity to simply take the money and walk away, yet he chose not to. He chose to kill people he just didn't need to kill, and he did this on more than one occasion.
People often ask me why I'm so paranoid about going online, especially in this day and age. What I'm about to tell you should answer that perfectly. This story took place around 3 years ago. I still feel surreal talking about it. The whole ordeal felt like it happened over a blur, but I can somehow remember it to the smallest details. It was a Friday night, and while I normally would be with some friends, I instead found myself at home. It was an odd time of year. My friends seemed to be either busy or sick. This wasn't also terrible though. I do occasionally enjoy having some time to myself, and it was a good time to sort of just relax on my computer. I naturally hopped on my computer and started surfing the web. It wasn't productive, but it did help me unwind a lot. After an hour or two, however, my boredom started to take its peak. I was running out of things to do, websites to go on, but I recalled a website my friends and I used to go on a while back. Omegle had been around for a good time now, but I hadn't gone on it in a while. I felt the whole concept was a bit silly at my age, but with all of this, my boredom was getting to me. I said hell with it, and decided to open a new tab. I opened Omegle, and to my expectations, nothing much had changed at all. It was the usual meet random people via text or video. It didn't really have the same thrill, quote-unquote, as a few years ago, but I'm not 100% sure why. After scrolling through some people, however, I was in all honesty still bored. But as I was about to hit escape, I was greeted by a man. The man had an almost infectious smile. His teeth were almost completely showing, and it honestly threw me off guard at first. Needless to say, he seemed really happy about something, and this intrigued me for whatever reason. Not only was I trying to not ruin this man's extremely good mood, I genuinely found it interesting seeing a smile like that these days. Most people just seem so unhappy. "What's up, man?" I politely said, trying to match the man's energy. There was a slight pause in our interaction, and then the smiling man then said in a cool and alluring voice, "Why, hello there, stranger. Normally I'd ask how you're doing, but you seem like you're having a great day," I replied jokingly. The man chuckled to himself and continued, "Life is too short to be unhappy. You never know when things could take a turn. Is it worth looking back and only remembering yourself frowning?" That took a rather deep turn, but I suppose the guy was right. There's no point in sulking constantly. "Now, would you like to meet a friend?" the man abruptly said. Sure, I guess," I replied. The smiling man then brought out a person in a mask. The person seemed tall and skinny, and the mask was a blank white one. The only thing I could see on the masked person was part of their eyes. But that wasn't even the scary part. The person in the mask seemed awfully limp, essentially the opposite of the smiling man. "Now, there's no need to be afraid," the smiling man said, acknowledging the shock on my face. "Is this some sort of sick joke?" I asked. "Now that's no way to treat someone you've just met now, is it?" the man said, still with a smile burnt on his face. I remained silent. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some sort of prank. But when the man's smile turned from happiness to a sick grin, I knew something sinister was happening. My fear turned into irritation as the man kept smiling and holding this limp person on the screen. I took several screenshots and told the man to give up this sick prank or else I'd report him as a nuisance to the police. But the man just kept smiling. Just as my hand was going to the escape button, the man stopped me. "Not so fast." "Are you really gonna try and talk your way out of this?" I asked the man angrily. The man continued with his crazed smile and put a piece of paper up to the screen. It was blurry at first, but I wiped my monitor and let his webcam refocus. I was in shock. My face went pale as I read the paper once again. It was my address. A shiver went up my spine. My adrenaline was pumping. I had no idea what to do next. Should I keep stalling him? Will the police even arrive in time? The man just started chuckling and giggling to himself. I quickly unplugged my computer and surveyed my room. I sprinted down the stairs and confirmed my front and back doors were locked. Some of my blinds were open, but there was no point in running to close them. I had no time to spare. For all I knew, my address could have been leaked for that whole entire conversation. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen and ran to the nearest bathroom. I threw whatever chair I had against the bathroom door and tried to block it closed. Things just kept going downhill from there. I grabbed my phone and called the police. The emergency operator told me that the police were caught up in other things as it was late on a Friday night, but they would try and send a unit my way as soon as possible due to the nature of the emergency. But while the operator was on the phone with me, I heard my back gate fling open. That gate was never used. It always remained locked. I asked the operator whether the cops had arrived at my house yet. She said the nearest unit was still about 5 to 10 minutes away. I then heard footsteps approaching my backyard. I knew I had one chance. It wouldn't take long for whoever this was to get into my house and eventually find me. I pondered my options for a second, but eventually came to a decision. I opened the bathroom window and leaped out of it, I landed in the least graceful way possible. The crunches of the leaves under my feet would definitely have alerted the intruder. It was now or never. I ran faster than I had ever had, the chills and shivers up my spine only fueling my stamina. I eventually jumped over my fence and onto the street. I ran towards the main road as fast as I could. My more logical side told me that I should have at least looked back to see if they came alone or how they even arrived at my house. But there was no going back now. After what seemed like several minutes of frantic sprinting, I finally arrived at an intersection. There were obviously no cars or people at this time at night, but at least it was in front of a traffic light with cameras and street lamps. I looked back to see if I was being followed, but the coast seemed clear enough. I finally mustered up the courage to walk back to my house and see if the police had arrived. Judging by the sounds of the sirens, they did. I explained to the cops everything that happened when I got there. I even showed them the screenshots. They managed to identify the man as someone who had just gotten out of jail on a petty vandalism charge. They never suspected him of doing anything like this. I asked them about the person in the mask and whether they were okay. They explained it to me, but tried to keep it in a neutral tone. The masked man's dimensions seemed to match up with someone who had gone missing not long ago. They were still unsure of whether the person was unconscious or dead in the video. The smiling man was logging my IP address the whole time. He somehow managed to trace those video packets to my house. The police were still trying to understand whether it was the man himself or someone else who came over to my house. Our exchange was then interrupted by one of the investigators handing us over a piece of paper in an evidence bag. The officer looked just as stumped as I did. "What is it?" I asked. The cop was hesitant to even show it to me at first. "Listen, this is my house, okay? You guys need to show me what you're looking at right now," I replied back angrily. The officer then showed me the piece of paper, and my heart sank. On the paper it read, "Fun meeting you," with a smiley face written at the end of it.
I am a 20-year-old female, but the story took place when I was 11. I was with my younger cousin, who was also a female, and was around 8 years old at this time. We will call her Julie. Our small town was located on the outskirts of Rockford, Illinois. It has a notorious reputation for drugs, violent crime, and sex trafficking. I lived in a neighborhood with a Casey's gas station within walking distance. I would often go there with my friends to buy energy drinks, snacks, and junk food. I could go there pretty much whenever I wanted to, since nobody had to drive me there. My parents didn't keep too close of an eye on me, and I was a fairly self-sufficient kid for my age, which was definitely to my advantage in this experience. One night, Julie and I decided to have a sleepover at my house. I told my parents we were going to walk to the gas station to grab some drinks with my leftover birthday money. They were talking and drinking with my aunt and uncle, and just sorta shooed us away. It took us maybe 10 to 15 minutes to walk there. As we were entering the parking lot, we saw a big semi-truck parked in front of the building. This wasn't that unusual, especially if supply is being dropped off. As we were walking past it, a middle-aged man came out of the gas station and asked us how we were doing. We were polite kids, so we stayed and talked with him for a couple of minutes. "Do you girls like horses?" We both replied, "Yes." "There are a couple of thoroughbreds in the trailer if you want to look at them real quick." Julie got really excited and instantly agreed, and begins to make her way to the other side of the truck. I hesitated, feeling that something was really off about this situation for two reasons. One, there wasn't a diesel pump at this gas station, and this man didn't seem to be dropping off any supplies at this store. There was another gas station that did have diesel pumps less than a mile down the road. Two, the trailer wasn't the right kind for him to have horses in it. Horse trailers have large windows so that the horses can breathe and whatnot. If you were to put a horse inside the trailer that he was hauling, it would have suffocated. This was the biggest red flag for me. There was no way he actually had horses in his trailer. He took a step closer to us, and I began to panic, before blurting out, "My dad is actually going to be here any minute, so we're in a bit of a hurry." Julie protested, knowing that this was a lie. I had to cover up by saying that he had texted me while we were walking. "Oh, are you girls sure you don't want to see them? It would only take a second," he said as he inched closer to us. I apologized to him, grabbed Julie by the arm, and pulled her into the gas station. I didn't stop there, though. I dragged her all the way to the women's bathroom. All the while, she was complaining about not getting to see the horses. I had to tell her why I lied, and when she understood, she went quiet. After 5 minutes, I told her to wait there, and that I would go see if the man was gone. As I peered through the window into the parking lot, I saw that the coast was clear. So we bought what we came for, and left with a bag in each of our arms. It was dark by this point, and to avoid any other interactions with strange people with dangerous propositions, we trespassed through a field instead of walking along the main road. We both figured that would be the better route from now on. We never told our parents about this encounter because we didn't want them to say that we could no longer go by ourselves anymore. I know that sounds like a dumb reason, but I figured if I could sniff out one potential kidnapping, I could do the same if it were to ever happen again. I was a strange kid, and I really loved books, movies, and shows related to kidnapping. The point is, I felt like I could handle this kind of situation if it came my way again. Now that I'm older, I know that mindset was incredibly stupid, since I'm now aware of the gamble I was taking. I'm lucky that was the only time that I had ever felt unsafe there. My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had much sleep, so I had just woken up from a nap. I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain, and then made my way over to the window. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up in the shower. Before I continue, I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little paranoid sometimes. It also doesn't help that I have PTSD as well. Anyways, I was now back in my room, and I took a seat on my bed. I texted my then boyfriend and asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I just relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time, when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened carefully. I heard a few more steps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused by this. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I had an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking why my boyfriend hadn't knocked on the door or called before he showed up. We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either text, call, or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way home, or if he was at the door, because there had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I then called out to him, and suddenly, all fell silent. I texted him and asked if he was at the door. There was no reply, so I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was about 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice as I came face to face with a fucking clown. I know I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh. thinking that this had to be some kind of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. So I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into the phone, "Very funny, asshole. Love the whole scary clown thing." I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was confused, and I explained to him about the clown at the window and said that he and his friend did a good job scaring the piss out of me. He seemed confused, saying that all of his friends were hanging out at the pub and that he was not a part of any plan to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat as I looked back at the clown, who was still just outside my window. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking butcher's knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on, so I grabbed my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me that he was now only a few minutes away. He shouted at me to stay inside and to lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding on the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side.
"Let me in, child."
I didn't respond to the voice. I just stood perfectly still, waiting for the next move. Loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle on its hinges, but I kept quiet, even when I heard the doorknob rattling. Although I was pretty scared at this point, I was also getting a tad irritated and yelled out to the clown, "Fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I then heard muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice.
"Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides."
I had enough of this. I was about to go out and confront this creepy asshole myself when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone, say, "Hang up and call the cops." After some consideration, I thought that maybe confronting the creepy clown outside with a butcher's knife was not the correct course of action. So I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining to the police dispatcher the situation. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told them that I think the clown just broke into the house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe, and that's when I heard my ex yelling out, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get the hell out of here! The police are on the way!" The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh and took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some kind of saw blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't move or scream. Fear then overcame me, as I realized my boyfriend was now out there with 2 creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone, "There's another clown outside my bedroom. Please hurry." After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I quickly let him inside. We then held each other tightly until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside of my bedroom window. There were red marks all over them. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they, in fact, out for blood?
When you go off to college, a lot of people warn you about the dangers that can occur on campus. But what no one warns you about is the ride home. While I'm sure most people have fun and possibly even memorable rides home from school with their family, mine was only memorable because I made it home with my life. It was the beginning of December and the fall semester had just ended, and at the time, I had made plans with some friends back at home to go see the midnight release of a movie that was coming out instead of taking my exams and then driving home the next day. I planned to drive home as soon as I finished my schoolwork. This meant that I left campus around 4 in the afternoon. I would make it to the mall for the movie just in time, so I did just that. I left right after my last test, and I could not have been more excited to see my friends. I had about a 6.5-hour drive ahead of me, so I got comfortable and began making my way home as quickly but safely as possible. Now that being said, even though I was in a rush, I was still raised to be helpful. I was always taught growing up that if you saw someone on the side of the road, you stop and ask if they need help. Sometimes people don't need anything, and you just keep driving, but you never know when someone might need you. So at around 9:30 at night, as I was driving along this dimly lit back road, when I saw a car parked on the side of the road, I didn't even hesitate. I pulled over and hopped out of my car to ask if they needed any help. Right away, I could see the car was being driven by an elderly man, and he claimed that his car had a flat tire on the passenger side and asked me if I would help him put the spare on for him. I told him of course and asked him to pop the trunk so I could get the tire out, and he did. But as I leaned into the trunk to lift up the mat that covers the spare, I felt the man press something against my neck. My entire body tensed up as I could feel the shocks from the taser that he just pressed against me fired. I keeled over forward, and the man was able to easily push me and force me into the trunk of his car before slamming it shut. I recovered from being tased before we pulled off from the side of the road, but as I reached above me for the emergency handle that it's in most trunks, I couldn't find it. I could feel the tires moving as we began making our way down the secluded back street when I realized the old man had forgotten to take my phone before locking me up. He must have been in such a hurry and didn't want to risk being overpowered that it didn't even cross his mind. I squirmed around in the trunk until I could get my hand into my pocket and pull my phone out. After calling the police and telling them what road I was just on, it was only a matter of a couple of minutes before they were able to find me. I heard the sound of police sirens behind us as they pulled the elderly man over. And once the car came to a stop, I began banging on the trunk to let the officers know where I was. Once the man was in custody and I was out of the trunk, I asked the officer if he knew why the man tried to abduct me, but he didn't know why. It wasn't until the trial that we learned that this man, who I thought was old and frail, had actually confessed to abducting multiple people between the 90s and the late 2000s. I was just the lucky one.
I used to work at a Starbucks here in Cardiff, and I've got to be honest, it's one of the better jobs I've ever had. The manager was brilliant, the other staff were nice and looked out for each other, so for a minimum-ish wage job, it was about as good as it gets. The only bad shifts to work were the first halves of Monday and Tuesday mornings, as the pre-work rush meant people were often at their absolute worst. I mean, don't get me wrong, people could be complete jerks at other times of the day or week, but the highest concentration of them was Monday and Tuesday mornings, without a shadow of a doubt. But rude customers aren't scary. Annoying and frustrating, yes. Chillingly cruel and calculating, not as much. Which is why this particular incident has stayed with me for so long, and I always seem to use it as my personal point of reference for how terrible human beings can be to each other. So, it's a Monday morning, and we're just coming to the end of the rush at around 9 a.m. 30 minutes more and the caffeine fiends will start to thin out, and we can get some coffee and make a smoke break of our own. I heard her before I saw her. Like, she was only just trying to get a handle on what had been pure harpy screeches just moments before. Some woman was on her phone, ranting away and not looking where she was going as she tries to find the back of the queue. In doing so, she cuts off this other bloke who politely informs her that she's queue jumping. I don't know if she actually didn't hear him or was just tactically ignoring him, but either way, this bloke has to tap her on the shoulder before saying, "Excuse me, believe I was ahead of you." The woman just shrugs this off at first, giving the guy a gesture like, I'm too busy to listen to you. I remember the look of anger on the guy's face as she gently but firmly grabs the strap of her handbag and tugs her out of the queue before taking her place. I'm a bit torn about the whole thing. Like, yeah, it was righteous, but laying hands on someone, I feel like there could have been a better way to resolve the issue. But it wasn't like the guy had picked her up and thrown her, and due to the size difference, that was definitely a possibility. Anyway, she reacts like this had been the case, like him actually standing up to her was some horrific incident of assault, and starts demanding someone call the police, even though she herself was on the phone and simply refused to hang up. A couple of staff members and customers managed to calm the situation down, and we get the guy his coffee before one of my colleagues serves the angry woman. I didn't serve her, but when she got her order, she turns to be like, excuse me, this coffee isn't as hot as I asked for. No, I know better than to just argue with customers, and especially absolute whoppers like her. So I do as I'm asked and heat the coffee up a little bit more for her. I hand it back. She dips a finger in it and once again tells me, this coffee isn't hot enough. Now, bearing in mind, she just watched me run some steam through it, but again, I do as I'm asked and give her back some literally steaming hot coffee that she proceeds to absolutely overload with sugar. No wonder she was in such a stinking mood. Her entire life was probably one big sugar crash, hence why she was such an unbearable person to be around. But little did I realize, that coffee wasn't for her, and on her way out of the store, she took the lid off of her scalding hot syrupy coffee and threw it in the guy's face as he sat reading his newspaper. God, the sound of that guy screaming was absolutely horrific. Like I didn't actually see the woman throw her coffee in the guy's face, so I thought someone had broken a leg or something. That's the only time I've heard someone scream in pain like that. When my old skating buddy absolutely shattered his leg on this visit to a Bristol skate park one year. But what followed in the coffee shop was pure chaos. People were pouring bottles of water onto this guy's face, ambulance staff and police turning up. I think the woman legged it as soon as she threw the coffee because, to my knowledge, no one was arrested, but the guy who had the coffee thrown on him suffered life-changing injuries. From what another colleague told me, the gross amount of sugar in the coffee meant that some of it actually stuck to his face like a kind of molten hot glue. He'd been left with terrible scarring for the rest of his life, and all because he stood up to some absolute monster in the queue that morning. That's what I find really scary, that some people out there are so unhinged that a seemingly normal interaction with them could end up with you suffering injuries you'll carry with you for the rest of your life. Just one moment of misjudgment, one little enough is enough moment, and boom, you're going to look at a very different version of yourself in the mirror for the rest of your natural life.
My name is Shelly, and 10 years ago, I wanted to make my own money because I was tired of asking my parents for money. I put in a lot of applications and I ended up getting hired at Chick-fil-A. I'm not going to lie, I was definitely excited because of all of the chicken nuggets I was going to be eating. Anyways, after I got hired, I started to get the hang of the job. It was pretty easy. I worked outside in the drive-thru line a lot because we were the busiest fast food restaurant in our town, and people really liked my personality. After working there for a few months, my dad's creepy friend Tyler would come there every day at the same time and go to the same drive-thru line, which was weird because I worked there after school and there were 2 drive-thru lines. The drive-thru line he'd always go to was mine, and he would always call me Shell Shell, which I've hated since I was a small kid. The thing is, he'd always order small stuff like a small fry or a small cookies and cream milkshake. A few times he came into the line, pull up to me, and then he'd say that he forgot his debit card, and he would just try and talk to me. I'm not dumb. I knew exactly what he was doing. Ever since I turned 13, he always acted weird toward me, telling me that I'm growing up into a woman, or that I look like a young woman now. There was this time when my parents were having a get-together with family and friends, and I yelled out to my parents that I had to pee, and I ran upstairs. I swear a few seconds later, Tyler burst through the door, looked at me and said, "Wow," and stared at me. Then he straightened up real quick and said, "Sorry, my bad," and closed the door. Like I said, he was weird. So we closed at 10 p.m., but we always take orders up until around 9:59. One day, we were inside cleaning up, and it was around 10:30 p.m. There were about 5 or 6 of us in Chick-fil-A at the time. I was mopping the floor, and a few of us saw a car pull up to the drive-thru, but turned around at the entrance because we put cones out there after 10 p.m. The car drove around our parking lot at least 10 minutes, and I noticed that it had temporary tags on it. After a while, our manager went outside and went up to the car due to it stopping in front of one of our windows every time it drove around. I watched the manager walk to the car as the driver rolled down the window. The window was all the way down before my manager reached the car, and to my surprise, it was Tyler, my dad's friend. He had a new car that I didn't recognize, but what made this very weird was that even when he rolled the window down, he never looked at my manager. He was staring directly at me, talking with my manager. I was standing behind the entrance door. He saw me looking at him, looking at me, but he never turned away like a normal person would. My manager walked back in and told me and my coworkers to hurry up so we can get out of here. I was the last person to get done with my closing, so it was just me and my manager. My manager told me to make sure the doors are locked. I told him okay, then I went to the bathroom. I figured I'd lock them once I'm done. As usual, I was on my phone while using the bathroom, and the bathroom door opens. I thought it was weird because my manager is the only other person in the building, and he's a guy. I yelled out that he's an idiot and he's in the wrong bathroom, but the thing is, he never left. It got weirder because I can hear him breathing by the door, but then I heard, Shell, it's me, Tyler Poop. Are you in here? I picked up my feet so he couldn't see them, but then he started to push open every stall door, saying my name. I texted my boss and it literally said, "Help, bathroom." Then Tyler got to my stall. He attempted to push the door open and then he laughed. He said that he knows that I'm in there. He looked in the crack of the door and said, "There you are." He then got down on his hands and knees, reached his hand under the door and attempted to unlock the stall. I kicked his arm and he said, "It's me, Uncle Tyler." As he said that, he proceeded to crawl under my stall door. I started to climb above my stall, then my manager burst through the door as I was screaming and crying. Tyler and my manager began to fight. I called the cops. After a few seconds, Tyler was unconscious on the bathroom floor. When the cops and the EMS got there, he was cuffed and loaded up into the ambulance. He was hit with a few charges and was recently released from jail. That situation just heightened my awareness of my surroundings.
We're going back a few years here to when I first moved out of my mom and dad's house and into my first ever apartment. It wasn't the most luxurious place to live, not by a long shot. A lot of stuff needed fixing up and the plumbing was terrible, and the bed springs creaked with every little movement I'd make at night. But it was cheap, really cheap, and for someone like me with a low-paying service job, it gave me a lot of extra disposable income that I could spend and save. So about a month or so into living in that little apartment, the ceiling fan in my bedroom started making these weird clicking noises. I could put up with some sketchy plumbing as long as the shower and the toilet flush still worked, but this was the middle of the summer in Miami, and not beachside either. So if that thing decided to stop working, trying to get to sleep would be pretty unbearable. I called the landlord, let him know the problem. He said that he'd send a repair guy out as soon as he could. But then the guy turned up and checked the ceiling fan out. He basically said, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just old. And young, dumb me just trusted that he was right. So one night, it's extra hot and humid, so I turned the ceiling fan up to the settings just before full blast before climbing into bed. I can hear it making those clicking sounds like extra loud as I'm drifting off, but I put on a podcast on my phone to kind of drown it out and drift off. Besides, rhythmic sounds like that aren't the worst thing, and a lot of people like myself find that they can actually get to sleep like that. I mean, some people even use an actual metronome to kind of hypnotize themselves into getting to sleep. But it might have been a few hours later when I woke up to a whining, whirring sound coming from above me. I couldn't quite work out where it was coming from at first, and in my tired state I rolled over and had to flick on the bedside lamp before I could figure out what exactly was making that noise. It was the ceiling fan. And right when I look up, I see how it's spinning all loose on its moorings, how it's looking increasingly out of control. Then all of a sudden, it cracks out of the actual ceiling and comes hurtling down towards me, right towards my face, while spinning ridiculously fast. I thought that was it right there, how that ceiling fan was about to take my head clean off, or at least do so much damage to me that I'd bleed to death right there in my bed. It's so weird when I look back at it, like they say the time slows down in situations like that, and in a sense they're right. It obviously didn't happen in slow motion, but I remember such bizarre details when I look back at it, how I noticed a little puff of plaster as soon as the fan came loose, how I noticed how dusty the old thing was as it got closer and bigger, plunging towards my face. Instinctually, I lay back down and tried to cover my face, letting out a screech of fear as I did so, then just kind of waiting for the pain to hit. But right as it was about to smash into my face, right as it was about to rip me up beyond all recognition, whatever electrical wire that it was hooked up to suddenly grew taut and held it right there in the air above me, stopping it from crashing into me. All that hit me was a little of the ceiling plaster and some dust, and I remember that weird anticlimactic feeling to this day, like it's burned into my memory. But it wasn't quite over there. It was still spinning really, really fast, and because it wasn't locked into the ceiling anymore, it was like swaying back and forth in the air above me, maybe only like few inches above my body, and I wasn't sure how long it was going to hold. I had to really, really carefully slide off of my bed, still terrified that the spinning blades were going to cut me up. It was painstaking. Move too quick and I might clip my head or a knee on the fan. Move too slow and I might just still be under it when the thing fell down on top of me. I made it out from under that thing and rushed towards the wall-mounted control unit before turning it off completely. I had knocks on my door from neighbors soon after who thought that there had been a home invasion or something. Every single one of them gasped when they saw just how close I'd been to being sliced and diced by the freaking ceiling fan. I slept on my couch that night, or rather, tried to sleep. I was still pumped with adrenaline from having the whole thing happen. The next morning, if you can believe it, the landlord actually blamed me for what had happened, flicking back and forth between telling me that I had it spinning too fast to not properly communicating the problem to the lazy repair guy who'd come out to check on it. It was absolutely outrageous, and only when I'd threatened civil litigation did he actually relent and agree to a rent reduction for the next few months to apologize. He ended up having a whole new ceiling fan installed, but you can bet your bottom I rearranged my bedroom so that my bed wasn't underneath that fan anymore. Sure, it was a little less comfortable getting to sleep during the summer, but after what happened that night, I just wasn't about to risk it. Let's just say I had a wear complex about ceiling fans ever since, and I never ever set them to full blast, no matter how hot it is.
I was born, raised, and still live in Texas. I come from a family of hunters. It's pretty much a family tradition. I'm going to tell you about something that I experienced when I was 20 years old, back in 2005. My father had just been diagnosed with lung cancer, and everyone in my family was naturally devastated by this, especially me, since my dad and I were very close. I had a lot of other personal stuff going on in my life at the time, and I felt that I needed to go out for a few days just to clear my head. I decided to make it a solo hunting trip, and packed up some camping gear, along with my Marlin 336 that my dad gifted to me when I was 18. If I could get sentimental for a moment, my father ended up passing away 3 years after his diagnosis, and to this day, I still use that rifle for hunting. Anyways, I'd say this happened around late October, early November. I don't want to be too specific with a location, because technically, I wasn't supposed to be hunting in this specific area. However, I will disclose that it was near the Mexican border. This will be important later. I decided to set up camp for 3 days before heading back. I had been hunting on this land before with some friends of mine, and I knew the precautions to take not to be spotted by the game warden. I'm sure if there's any other hunters listening to this broadcast, they'll be more than happy to tell you that we often wipe our asses with the rulebook. Before anyone judges me too harshly, or the practice of hunting in general, I will say that I'm a very spiritual person, and I have a profound respect for Mother Nature. I don't leave trash everywhere, and every animal that I put down, I never let go to waste. I'll be the first to admit, there are hunters that give us a bad name, and me not following the rules is more of a middle finger to the government than it is to the sport of hunting. I once straight up beat the shit out of someone who was a friend of a friend for shooting a stray dog for absolutely no reason. If it's consolation to anyone, I handed him a horrible ass-whooping for that. But I digress. The first day went off without a hitch, no problems whatsoever, aside from the fact that there was no game to be found anywhere. So I figured that I would head further south the next day to see if my luck would improve. Other hunters knew about this restricted location and may have already cleaned out this area. As night fell, I found myself sprawled out next to my truck, just staring up at the night sky, wondering if me and my dad would ever take another hunting trip together. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps slowly making their way through a nearby brush. This was alarming for obvious reasons. Whoever they were, they had the drop on me. I knew better than to light up a campfire under these circumstances, but if this person was roaming around in the dark without a flashlight, they may have had some kind of night vision apparatus, giving them the advantage. I was concerned, because if you were looking at me through the trees at that particular moment, it would have appeared that I was sleeping. I was in this odd position where I was resting on top of my sleeping bag with a blanket, because I felt claustrophobic being fully immersed in a sleeping bag. It was a good thing too, because this meant I was able to mobilize quickly, and something told me that I only had seconds to make a decision. I rolled sideways, and as soon as I did, I caught a quick glimpse of a muzzle flash coming from the tree line directly in front of me. I felt dirt fly up and hit my back from the bullet striking the ground next to me. I scrambled to my feet as more shots rang out from the trees, one of them shattering the passenger side window of my truck. I took cover behind the bed of my pickup and quickly drew the .38 snub-nose that I had strapped to my ankle. After the gunfire died down, I laid flat on the ground and returned to fire in the direction of the trees from under the truck. I heard several sets of footsteps fleeing from the area, but I held my position in case my theory about the night vision was correct. With only 2 rounds left in my .38, I pretty much spent the rest of that night underneath my truck with my pistol aimed at the darkness until the sun came out and illuminated my surroundings. I very cautiously got out from beneath my vehicle and packed up my gear as quickly as I could and hightailed it out of there. Later on, when I told a friend of mine about the incident, he said he wished I would have told him that I was heading that way. He would have warned me that the Mexican cartel started using that area to smuggle contraband and people across the nearby border. This friend of mine was a Mexican immigrant himself, and had several family members mixed up in the cartel and coyote groups, so needless to say, I trusted his word. All things considered, I think I got off pretty easy. Had I been in my sleeping bag that night, I have no doubt that bullet would have nailed me. These days, I stick to the designated hunting grounds. Some things are just not worth the risk.
The scariest thing that ever happened to me in the middle of the night is also something that I thought was going to end in me losing my life. I've read a few of those scary middle-of-the-night type stories and comments that, as much as they've been creepy, have ended with people just rolling over and going back to sleep. A nightmare, a wild animal banging on their window, that sort of thing. No offense intended, I'm sure those things scare the life out of them, but it's obvious that they weren't in fear for their lives. So, anyway, without further ado, this is the story of one of the worst nights of my life. So, on the night in question, I woke up at about 3 in the morning, feeling really bad. It took me a moment to work out just what was wrong with me, but I quickly realized that I had this intense burning sensation in my abdomen, like just to the right of my belly button. I was sweating so much my sheets were soaked, and as I rolled out of bed to turn the lights on, my heart rate went through the freaking roof. The muscle cramps were so bad that I was almost bent doubled over as I headed off into the bathroom to get some Tylenol. I mean, they were so bad that at first I thought my appendix might have burst, which, as some of you might well know, can be pretty serious. I stagger into the little kitchen of the apartment I was living in at the time to get a glass of water since I've never been able to dry swallow pills. Then I just sat there at the kitchen table for what seemed like a long time, until it got to the point where I was seriously considering just calling 911 and getting myself into an ambulance. I knew it would be a couple of grand just to get one over to my apartment, but there was no way I'd be able to drive out to the hospital with the pain as bad as it was. I'd crash my car and get myself killed long before whatever mysterious ailment I had managed to finish me off. Screw it, I eventually thought, and stumbled back in my bedroom to grab my phone to dial 911. As I'm online with the dispatcher describing exactly how bad the searing pain in my abdomen was, I found I just couldn't stand up anymore, so I sat back down on my bed as I'm grimacing in pain. My sheets were bundled up under my butt, and I know it sounds kinda dumb, but any kind of discomfort was just made utterly unbearable by the pain I was in. So I sit up and pull them out from under me, tossing them up near my pillows so I could just level myself out on the mattress. That's when I saw it. Lying on my mattress, all squished up and gooey from being crushed, was the biggest black widow spider I'd ever seen. My heart was already racing and I was sweating bullets, but seeing that thing sent me into an absolute panic. I pulled my shirt up and saw a bunch of that same spider's goo drying on my stomach, along with 2 telltale little holes where the spider had bitten me. I genuinely thought I was going to die if the ambulance didn't get there in time. I knew next to nothing about venomous spiders at the time, and I blurted out the revelation to the 911 operator, stammering about how something had bitten me and for the ambulance crew to please hurry. They did what they could for me, trying to keep me calm, but I was full-on hyperventilating by that point, convinced that my life was in grave danger. Now, long story short, as incredibly painful and distressing as it was, one of the paramedics reassured me that fatalities from Black Widow's spider bites are extremely rare, and even though they'd been treating me with anti-venom, along with some serious doses of painkillers and anti-inflammatories, I was almost certainly going to be okay. The relief was palpable. I just remember crying my eyes out in the ambulance and all the exhaustion and pain and relief just pouring out of me as I thanked the paramedics before they wheeled me into the emergency room. It was a few hours for me to get the proper treatment and evaluation, but I was discharged soon after so I could catch a taxi back to my apartment. So, that's my story. And if anyone can learn anything from this, about how not to fly into a fit of panic when they're bitten by a Black Widow spider, then I suppose I might have earned myself a little good karma. Like obviously getting yourself the proper treatment as soon as possible, but don't be fooled by those intimidating red and black appearances and that horror movie name. Black Widows are a lot of bark, but a distinctly non-fatal bite.
My name is Harry, and this happened about 9 years ago when I was 10 years old. Growing up, it was just me, my brother, and my mom. We didn't have a lot of money and we moved around a lot, most of the time in rough neighborhoods. We moved into an apartment building when I was about 10 years old. It didn't take us long to get settled in. My mom gave my brother and me a task to help out. My brother would go out and get groceries and work side jobs if he could, and my task was to do the laundry. One day I went down to the first floor with a basket full of laundry. I walked into the laundromat and started putting clothes into the machine. That's when a man walked in with a laundry basket of his own. He was about in his early 40s. Light bright hair that was slicked back and big 70s style glasses. He didn't say anything, but every now and then I would look across the laundromat and would see him staring at me. I tried not to look, but I couldn't help but check, especially when you're being watched. After some time, the man left the laundromat, which left me feeling relieved. Later that day, after finishing laundry, I was heading outside with my brother and a new friend to play baseball. Before exiting the building, I looked to my left down the corridor to the laundromat and I saw that same man from earlier. He was peering around the corner, looking into the laundromat. What was he doing, I thought? Was he actually looking for me? He was being very sneaky. I left the building before he had a chance to turn around and see me. About 3 or 4 days passed before I needed to do laundry again. The first thing I saw when I walked into the laundromat was that man. This time he spoke and said, "Hey, I didn't know you liked baseball," while giving me an unsettling smile. How did he know I liked baseball, I thought. Has he been watching me, following me? I said, "Oh yeah," while letting out an awkward fake laugh. I walked past the man and towards the washing machine. The man didn't say anything. Instead, he just stood there watching me again, still with a weird smile. Thankfully though, he left shortly after I was able to continue doing my laundry. One evening I was bored and I think there was some electrical problem in our apartment. Because of that, I wasn't able to play video games or watch TV. So I decided to do something productive and do some laundry. I went down to the laundromat and began doing the load. That's when the lights started flickering, and at the same time the man came into the laundromat. As soon as I saw him, I felt faint. He walked slowly up to me, looking up at the lights flickering, and said, "I think there's going to be a power outage." I looked up at the lights as well and said nervously, "Yeah, I think so too." I looked at the man, and he just gave me a creepy grin, just like before. At that point, the power did cut off, and the laundromat, along with the rest of the building, went dark. I was stuck in the dark laundromat along with this man. He then grabbed both of my arms really tight and pulled me close to him, and he said to me, "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid. It's only the dark. It's fine." Before I could say anything to tell him to let me go, he covered my mouth with his hand, then whispered to me saying, "Shh, it's okay. Don't worry." I remember thinking at that point I was about to die, thinking that that man was about to take me away, and it was pitch black in the building after all, and the exit to the building was just down the corridor. The lights then flickered back on, and the man said to me, "See? I said everything's gonna be okay," then letting me go from his tight grip. I remember standing there frightened, the man walking past me, and he left the laundromat. I never saw that man again after that, so I never mentioned it again. I sometimes think if the lights didn't come back on, would he have tried to take me away, or worse?